Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Webhooks session. Just a quick bit about myself. My name's Andrew Duncan. I'm the owner of DataBuzz. We're a Claris partner based down in Sydney, Australia. Yes, it took me 38 hours, 3 planes and 1 train to get here. So no complaints about your 6-hour train trip from Germany, thank you. I've been developing in FileMaker for about just over 30 years now, so getting a bit old, had lots more hair when I started, that's for sure. I'm a FileMaker certified developer. I've had a long-standing interest in integration and been working with webhooks for over 10 years, probably longer if I could remember back that far. And DataBuzz is a Claris partner, a Shopify partner, a Xero partner and a DocuSign partner amongst other partners. Like many of you, I've been collecting my Claris certification badges over the last few months, and I'm pleased to report at the time of recording I've got the full suite. And lastly, I've spoken to a number of FileMaker conferences over the years at FileMaker DevCons in the US and APAC, where I'm based. And this is my 3rd continent in terms of speaking at a FileMaker style conference. So it sort of got me excited, thinking, wouldn't it be cool to be the first person to speak at every continent at a FileMaker conference? So I've set myself a challenge. Some of them are going to be pretty easy, some are going to be a bit harder, but anyone interested in FileMaker, Engage and Totaka, it's going to happen. Come and see me tonight and we'll get the planning committee going. Some of you might know me from some of the solutions that our company sells. These are for customers and developers, and they basically to fast-track integrations and help you get up and running quicker. So we have solutions for the online accounting space, so QuickBooks Online, Xero, e-commerce space, Shopify and WooCommerce, DocuSign for e-signature, and we have solutions for sending and receiving SMS and MMS messages from the FileMaker platform. And the reason I'm showing you this slide, apart from getting a quick free plug for my solutions, is that all those support webhooks. So we've been working with webhooks for at least a decade, and each of these platforms work differently in terms of how they deliver webhooks. So we've got a lot of experience under our belt in integrating webhooks with the FileMaker platform. So what are we going to cover today? Well, obviously we're going to talk about what webhooks are and why you should use them. And we'll go through an overview of the sort of build it versus buy sort of range, do it yourself versus off-the-shelf commercial solutions like Claris Connect. And we'll do some live demos, pray to the demo gods for services like Stripe and Twilio. What are webhooks? So if you go and look up Wikipedia, which you tend to do these days to look things up, you'll get this sort of quite obtuse jargon-filled definition about webhooks being user-defined HTTP callbacks triggered by some event. The source site makes an HTTP request to the URL, blah, 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 blah. I find that quite hard to follow. I quite like this version from the Stripe developer documentation where they talk about a webhook endpoint is like a phone number that Stripe calls when certain things happen in your account. Such as the creation of a new customer or a payout to your bank account, and each event contains data explaining what happened. I find that quite much easier to follow. Hands up if you've used the insert from URL script step to make it a call to an API with the call options, about half of you. Webhooks are basically the opposite of that. In insert from URL, we're getting FileMaker to make a request to somewhere else. Webhooks are incoming notifications to our FileMaker server. Another way to think about it is like iOS notifications. We all get thousands or hundreds of thousands of, or tens or hundreds of notifications every day on our iPhones and iPads and so on. Think of webhooks like a push notification that gets sent to your FileMaker server, but it all happens silently in the background. You don't sort of interact with it. For example, if you were using Shopify to run an online store, wouldn't it be great if Shopify told FileMaker server every time there was a new order, and even better, it wouldn't be great if that order was just downloaded and appeared in your FileMaker tables automatically without you having to do anything. Sorry about that. So webhooks like a push notification for FileMaker server. They're triggered by an event. We're all familiar with script triggers in FileMaker Pro, which are triggered by events, and you can pass data through a script parameter. Webhooks are like this, work in the same sort of way. Who provides webhooks? So here's some examples of companies' platforms that offer webhooks for their customers. So DocuSign, Xero, Shopify, WooCommerce, Twilio, and Stripe, but just 6 examples I plucked out at random. Anybody have customers or anybody using any of these platforms in their current business? Yep, so you're in a position to start using Webhooks. In fact, is anyone using Webhooks already in their business? Great, excellent. So when would I use a webhook? Here's some real-world examples. So use a company like Stripe to do sort of credit card processing, and someone makes a payment. It'd be great to get notified about that. If you have an online store, Stripe or Shopify WooCommerce, it'd be great to get notified when a new order's been received and have that appear in your FileMaker solution. If you use a cloud accounting software like QuickBooks Online or Xero, if you issue an invoice, someone pays that invoice and then that gets reconciled, for example. It'd be great to have the invoice updated in FileMaker to mark it as paid. If you use a messaging service like Twilio to send notifications to customers like appointment reminders and so on, and people reply to that, like reply Y to confirm and that sort of stuff, it'd be great to get those back in FileMaker. If you use DocuSign for e-signature, if someone completes an agreement, it'd be great to be notified when that agreement is signed, and even better to get that that signed PDF downloaded into FileMaker without having to do anything. And also if you're using a mailing list service like MailChimp, if someone subscribes or unsubscribes, you might want to make the appropriate updates against their contact record in FileMaker. And finally, in addition to all of those, if you use something like Slack for your internal group messaging, it might be good to get a notification sent to a particular Slack channel, maybe even with a little FMP URL, so you can click the link and be taken to a particular FileMaker record. So, benefits of webhooks, they should slowly be becoming obvious, hopefully, to everyone. But we're talking about automatic notifications of new events, new orders, new payments, new SMS messages. And it's all about eliminating the need to manually check or manually poll or have a server-side schedule running every 5 minutes checking for stuff. And it's the sort of the push versus the pull paradigm. Push is a webhook. It's very efficient. They only get sent when something happens. Pull is, hey, DocuSign, any agreements been completed for me in the last 5 minutes? And obviously this is about eliminating the manual entry of new orders, new payments, new records, eliminating double data entry. And it's worth noting that some platforms don't support the polling or the pull checking method. They only support the push or the webhooks method. And it's obviously a much more efficient process. If you've got 1,000 customers checking DocuSign every 5 minutes for new agreements, whereas if DocuSign is sending out 20 webhooks in the same period of time, because that's the only agreements that were signed, that eliminates a lot of unnecessary traffic, resources on the server and wasted requests. And I just want to talk briefly about how we use webhooks internally at Databuzz. It's sort of like a bit of a real-world example. We've had a number of online stores running WooCommerce for a number of years, and when we get a new order, we've set up WooCommerce to send a webhook to our FileMaker server, which is a PHP page, and that downloads the record and pulls down the line items and the customer and puts everything in the right spot. And we then trigger a FileMaker script after that to go and raise an invoice in Xero, our cloud accounting software, and that all happens automatically. And so it's eliminated tens or hundreds of hours of manual data entry work for us each year, and it's a great feeling to sort of come into the office in the morning and see new orders in FileMaker, and we haven't had to lift a finger. So ultimately this is all about eliminating less of the sort of double data entry and freeing up staff to do sort of more meaningful, productive work. Okay, so let's break down a webhook in a bit more detail, just one sec. Okay, so it mentioned earlier in the definition that a webhook is an HTTP callback or an HTTP request. So I'm going to assume you're familiar with making a HTTP request using like the insert from URL and the curl options. And it's often called a callback URL. They sort of get used interchangeably. And that request, if it's a post or put, for example, will often have a payload, and so it's some data associated with the event. And describing the event, and that data could be JSON or could be XML. Or if it's a GET request, it could be sort of little query parameters in the GET URL string. Here's an example from QuickBooks Online for the JSON payload that I received when I got a payment notification. You can see it's got an event notifications array with an entities array, and there's just one entity in this notification, and it's saying that the name is a payment, ID is 193, the operation is create, and there's a timestamp. And that's QuickBooks telling me I've had a new payment, here's the ID, it was created, it wasn't on an update, and here's when it occurred. I can then go and make another request to QuickBooks' API and say, okay, go and get me all the details for payment 193, and I can then go and allocate that to the invoice and mark the invoice as paid and keep everything all neat and tidy without me having staff having to sort of manually do this. In terms of setting up a webhook, it's obviously specific to each platform that you're working with, but typically they'll have a web admin sort of interface where you can go and create a new webhook and configure it. So here's an example from Shopify. So you create a webhook and they say, well, what's the event? What's the trigger for the webhook? So I've chosen order creation in this example. And then for the payload, what format do you want? Well, obviously we want JSON for FileMaker these days. And then you put in the URL of your webhook, and we'll talk a bit more about URLs shortly. And that's as simple as that's typically all you need to do to configure a webhook in one of these platforms these days. So let's talk a bit more about the URL or the callback URL. So this can be many things. It can be a file that you program in your preferred programming language, like PHP or JavaScript or Node.js or Python or whatever it might be. And it'll sit on your web server, and it needs to do a number of things. And it could sit on your FileMaker server, it could sit on a web server that you maintain, or it could be a URL that another service generates, like Claris Connect, in which case you don't need to worry about hosting and all that stuff. Claris Connect will manage that for you. And it needs to do a number of things. It obviously needs to receive the post or the GET request and process it. So the URL, if it's a PHP file, might look something like this, myserver.com/my-whatever-file.php. Or if it's a Claris Connect generated webhook, they'll generate the URL for you and you just copy and paste that accordingly. So there's no limits to how you can program these webhook files if you're going to do it yourself. I'm a PHP developer by night, so I do a lot of this in PHP, but these days you might be thinking about Node.js or JavaScript. So in terms of what the webhook file needs to do, we've sort of mentioned briefly, it needs to receive and process the incoming notifications. So we've mentioned it's typically a post or a GET request. Some platforms require authentication. They need you to prove that you are the appropriate recipient for the webhook and no one else is trying to steal your webhooks. I mentioned they need to capture the payload, typically JSON, which we can pass quite easily in FileMaker. And once you receive the webhook, then now it's about, well, we obviously want to talk to our FileMaker solution. We might want to go and create or update records or perform a FileMaker script. And then we need to confirm that we've received the webhook successfully with an HTTP 200 status code response. In terms of that last bit about communicating with your FileMaker solution, so now we're going to be using one of the FileMaker server APIs. So these days it's essentially going to be the data API or the OData API. Pros and cons to each of those. OData doesn't require tokens and managing the life cycle of a token. It just uses basic authentication, so much easier. Data API has been around a lot longer. In FileMaker server world, you can use either as well. OData is now standard on or built into Server 90.5 on Mac, Windows and Linux. You've also got on the FileMaker server side the older APIs, the PHP API, which you shouldn't use. It's been deprecated, so please don't use that. And then the old XML API, I can't think of a reason why I'd even think about using that these days. And then I've included Claris Connect. Even though Claris Connect isn't strictly speaking an API, it's part of the bigger Claris platform. It's sort of can be bundled with your license in, and it's obviously got a built-in connection to your FileMaker, so it can be a nice, easy way to get up and running. Which leads me into talking about some of the buy options. So if you don't want to do it yourself, if you're not a PHP or JavaScript developer, no problem. Plenty of other options out there for low-code, sort of no-code solutions. So anybody here using Otto and Automatic.cloud for their hosting? They've got a great built-in webhook feature, which is very simple to set up. You've just got a FileMaker file to create them. I'm a big fan of that. I love using that. Steve Winter from Matatira, I think it's pronounced, in New Zealand, has a similar service, FM-API, where you can use them to be your webhook receivers and send all your data to your FileMaker server. Salant.cloud once again, another host, and they've got a solution called Sidecar that can be web receivers for your Solana-hosted solution. I was intrigued to see that the MBS plugin has a webhook receiver functionality. Talk to Christian about that. He's got all the details, but that basically can open up a socket on your server and listen for incoming requests and trigger a FileMaker script, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, Claris Connect, which I'll talk about it in more detail now. Anybody using Claris Connect for anything in general, not necessarily webhooks? Okay, that's interesting. So as you know, it's got apps for many popular services, and many of those support webhooks. So QuickBooks Online, DocuSign, Stripe, Twilio, just to think of a few. But if it doesn't have an app for a platform you're working with, you can just create a generic webhook, and that's a really easy way to create a webhook that'll work with anything, essentially. And as we know, it's a low-code interface. There's no programming experience required. It's got the new custom connectors, which are obviously a bit more advanced, but for your basic webhook, it's more sort of drag and drop and create actions and talk to your FileMaker server and run a few scripts maybe. And yeah, so ultimately it's a great, you basically need to create a flow to receive the webhook and then create some actions to maybe create some records and run a script in your FileMaker file. And I'm going to tempt fate, and I'm going to try and build a webhook in Claris Connect as part of my demo, just to show you how easy it is to build one of these in Claris Connect. And as we know, since April, when FileMaker 20 was released, we've got a free tier now, which gives you up to 500 free flow steps a month. And after that, you can sort of upgrade to a paid subscription. Here's just a bit of a high-level overview comparing the do-it-yourself versus a Claris Connect commercial solution. A lot of pros and cons to each approach, depending on where you stand, but Claris Connect manages all the hosting, SSL certificates, login, and that. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. You just need to create a flow and create some actions. Do it yourself. You've obviously got to build a webhook and you program that in PHP or JavaScript or whatever it might be. And then you've got to work out where you're going to host it. You've got to have an SSL certificate. You've got to update your server and maintain all that. That might be trivial if you're doing all that already. So obviously, yeah, there's pros and cons to each sort of approach. In terms of when it comes time to testing and debugging your webhooks, when you're getting started for the first time, I'm a big fan of using this website called webhook.site to be your webhook, to be your URL, your callback URL, because it lets me sort of visualize. I'm a bit of a visual learner. Lets me see what the payload and the webhook actually looks like, whether it's a put, a post, or a get. And you can see there down the bottom, it's showing me the JSON payload that was sent through. I can see exactly what there's going to be. There's going to be 4 JSON objects, and I know their names. And often the documentation is either non-existent or out of date, so I just like to see exactly what I'm getting at, and then I can switch back to Claris Connect on my own URL, and then I'll know exactly what I've got to work with. Okay, how are we going? Are you all still with me? Lost? Confused? Okay, let's push on. So I'm going to do some demos now. I've got 2, one with Twilio, which is a API platform, and they have a messaging service, and you can use it to send and receive messages. And I've set up a PHP webhook to receive messages and get them into a FileMaker solution. And then I'm going to do a similar one with Stripe, and we're going to simulate a payment, and you create a Claris Connect flow and get that running. So just to break down, the Twilio webhook one is, so you might be sending out things like appointment reminders where they say, reply with Y to confirm and N to cancel and that sort of stuff. So people would send an SMS back to you in reply to your message typically, so it goes back to your Twilio number. And I've configured Twilio to trigger a webhook to a PHP file. And that PHP file uses the data API to create record in my FileMaker solution and run a script if I needed to and whatnot. So going to get a bit of audience participation. If you can afford to send a message to an American number, I'll show you the number in a sec. I'm just going to get my FileMaker file ready to go. So this is the file that's going to use. It's our FM SMS solution. I'm actually hosting it in Australia, so it's a bit... Oh, I forgot to do the function thing, sorry. Yes. There we go. Okay, so that's my FM SMS file. I'm in my replies table. any reply that comes in is going to just be a record in here. So if you're up for it and you've got, if you can afford to send an SMS to this number, get out your phones, just send me a message, say your name and where you're from, nothing rude because it's been recorded, and let's get those coming in, and then we'll switch back to FileMaker and we'll see them come in as they arrive. So I'll leave that there. So hopefully someone's playing along here. There's the 3133. Okay, finally. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Okay, so that's how it works. I was hoping all of you would be flooded with messages, but here they come. So thank you. So that's how you can get SMS replies into FileMaker through a webhook. All happens auto-magically, all done sort of server-side through APIs. Does that mean coffee break? I think. We've got about 20 more minutes. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone, for... it's getting exciting. Okay. So that's a simple one. In terms of I'll just show you the PHP file. It's very simple. It's mostly comments, actually, for the first bit. But if we zoom in a bit, basically I'm just got a configuration section for the FileMaker file and the username and password and so on. And then I'm logging into my FileMaker file using the data API, using curl, checking for errors, and then I'm creating a record and I'm taking the post request parameters and putting those into fields, and then I'm making another data API request to create the record, and then I'm logging out. And very simple, so a couple of hundred lines of code. So yeah, webhooks don't need to be particularly complicated depending on what you do, and I could also make that run a FileMaker script and do lots of other stuff if I wanted to. Now let's. So my second demo is Stripe. We all familiar with Stripe, a credit card payment process? You've probably paid something with Stripe in your time. So this is the webhook that I'm going to create, and I'll try and make it not too boring as you watch me do this. But it's going to do 4 things. It's going to receive the webhook from Stripe. And then the rest of it's talking to FileMaker server. So we want to do a few things. I want to create a record with the payload of the webhook, just so I've got a sort of a history of the incoming webhooks. And then I can run a FileMaker script to go and pass that webhook out and populate fields. But I need to create the record, and then I need to retrieve the record by its ID and run a script. Whereas with my PHP file, I just created the record. And I could run a script in the same request because I'm using sort of the data API natively, whereas Claris Connect, it's all a bit abstracted, so I've got to create the record, and then I've got to go and retrieve the record, and then I've got to run a script, so it's running the script on the correct record, if that makes sense. So we'll just jump out of that and get into Claris Connect. Whoops, shouldn't have done that. Okay. So we'll go to Claris Connect. Going to create a new flow. Okay, and there's a built-in app for Stripe, so not the fastest internet. So I'm just going to search for Stripe. There it is, and I'm going to select the trigger. In this case, I'm going to be a charge succeeded. And now I need to sign into Stripe to authenticate. It might already recognise that I've already authenticated recently and use that. Yes, it does. So I've already authenticated, so I can just recycle that connection, which is great. Okay, so I've already set up my webhook receiver. Now I need to continue and get the URL. So Claris Connect generates the URL for me automatically. I just need to copy that. And now I need to go and test it because I need to send an example of what's going to come through from Stripe. So Claris Connect will know what is expected, and I can then reference that in my next request. So jumping over to Stripe, I'm in my test mode, so it doesn't matter what I do here. I'm on my developers webhooks page, so I'm going to go and create a new endpoint, a new URL. I'm just going to paste in my Claris Connect URL and say Claris Connect Payments. And then I need to select my events. So Stripe obviously support quite a few different event triggers. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to choose the charge. So there's 13 charge events. I'm just going to tick them all, make it quick, but I really just want the charge exceeded is all I'm after here. I've got my URL, I've got my events. Now I can add my endpoint. So that's just sitting there waiting for a new charge, and then it'll trigger a notification to the app. So I'm just going to quickly put through a dummy payment for $25. FileMaker work. And I'll choose my little test customer. Already got the credit card details there, so I'm just going to submit the payment. Okay, so that's gone through. So if I go back to Claris Connect, you can see that it's recognised that it's received a notification already, so I can save the trigger. So that's basically my webhook set up. It'll just start receiving those. It's obviously not doing anything else with them at the moment. So now I need to go and create some actions. So I'm going to talk to FileMaker server. I'm going to create a record. I'm going to have to sign in. And I'm going to get a little my secret set of details. If you're watching the video, these will no longer work, so don't try and steal them. That's my database. Great. Okay, we're signing in. Okay, authenticated, so we're all downhill from here, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to choose my layout. It's my webhooks payment layout is the one I want to use. And I've got all these fields. I could sort of pull apart the JSON and Claris Connect to populate this. I just want to create a record in FileMaker in a sort of a webhooks table so I can see the whole payload that was received. So I'm just going to get Claris Connect to populate the whole body of the webhook request into my webhook JSON field and do nothing else. I'll get a script to do everything else at that point. So I've got the webhook, it's creating a record. Now I need to go and retrieve the record it's just created. So I need to go back to FileMaker server, get record by ID, and how do you know which ID to get? Well, so we're going to choose the same layout, and we're going to grab the ID that's returned when the record is created. So I can go back to my previous action and go and find the record ID, which the data API returns, and save that. So that's using the data API to get that record by that ID. And one more action, and that's going to be run a script, which is going to pass the data basically for us. Click continue. Thank you. Okay, same layout. And Claris, I think, yes, should be that one. And the script parameter, gosh, do I need a script parameter? Yes, I do. Let me just quickly check my script. Thank you. File mode, ID. Okay, yes, I need to get the primary key from the record that was returned in the previous action. So we're going to go to get record by ID. I'm going to find the primary key field. Yes, this is where I get confused because it sometimes shows JSON for a file that isn't your file, and then I realise I've got to actually go and run the previous step and get my data in there. So let me just run it all again. No, we go into this. Where do I go? Sorry, I had a blank moment. I'm looking for that review and test button actually, so I just found it, thankfully. So I'm going to test that action. Okay, so that created a record. You can see it just in the background, just appearing. Now I can go and test this action, which should give me what I need.
You should test and review every step of the way.
Every step of the way? Okay. Well, there is no test and review for that one, is there? Let me just see if I go back in here, if that's now available. If not, I'll create a webhook from scratch and run it again. No, okay, I'm just going to save that. Just going to go and quickly do a new payment, which will give me everything I need. Australian dollars, it's very cheap. Okay, we'll submit that. Okay, so I should have everything I need now. Fingers crossed. Nothing like live programming to put you under stress. No, where did that go? Let me just have a quick peek at my working copy. Just one sec.
Don't you have to enable the flow?
Yes, I do. Yes. Let me just see. Yeah. Yes. So to save sort of stuffing around, I'm just going to use this one. But you can see I've got the primary key out of the JSON response from the get record by ID. So I'll just go back and grab this URL just to save time. Okay, so we'll just copy that. Oops. Go back here, go back to my dashboard. Just going to change the URL quickly. Okay, and yep, that's enabled, so we're good to go. So we'll just do a new payment. $120.
Did you now renew the webhook? Or what did you replace?
I just replaced the URL from my one I prepared previously to the one I was just working on, that just to save time. Okay, see my customer. Okay, so just to prove it's not me, we'll just delete that record and submit the payment. And I should hopefully get a record with all the JSON that's been passed out all the way from Australia. And yep, there we go. So I've got my record. So yeah, my script is very simple. It's just formatting the JSON, and if we have a look at that script, yeah, I'm just formatting the JSON basically. And yeah, it's obviously easy to pass out the JSON into each of those fields. So I think that concludes my presentation. So in terms of resources, obviously the Claris Connect help guide for Claris Connect, data API guide, and the OData API guide if you're going to go down those routes. Wim de Court did a presentation a couple of years ago at Claris Engage online. Get Hooked, he has a goes through Webhooks as well. I'll update these slides and put them on the Google Drive shortly. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to get in touch. But yeah, happy to take any questions now if anyone has any.